Hello and welcome to Vital Perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Marwin Spiller, and we are here at the law office of Chris McCall to talk about his current election and his vision for Peoria County. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for agreeing. I know you're a busy man, and so we appreciate the time off the campaign to sit down and talk to us.
It's always a pleasure to speak to the citizens of Peoria County, and grew up here, born and raised here, and so this is the least I can do, and we're going to try to communicate our message to as many people as possible.
Okay. And I want to talk about that message. Okay, and I want to start, I guess, with a question that you've probably been asked numerous times. Why did you decide to run?
Well, because the time is now. I want to change the narrative in which our children are going. I want to be able to protect the citizens of Peoria County, and I strongly believe that more of the same is actually going to be more dangerous for us if we continue with that narrative. And so I want to have programs that protect us instead of programs that continue to prosecute low-hanging fruit and actually do more harm than good in some respects.
Okay. Now, that sounds like a very progressive agenda, particularly within the context of law enforcement, state's attorney's office, broadly speaking. Is there a model by which you are operating on in terms of your ideas of what a state's attorney's office under Chris McCall would look like?
Well, I would say it's a plethora of different agendas. One, I would say there's a little Kamala Harris, there's a little Obama, there's a little Kim Fox in it, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it is progressive, but I would say it's common sense.
Okay.
The reason I would say that is because I have a background, yes, as a prosecutor, yes, as a private attorney, and I am a Democrat. I would consider myself socially liberal, but I am also consider myself fiscally conservative. And so I call them common sense approaches because no matter how you look at it, not only does it make sense from a safety perspective, a community outreach perspective, but it also makes sense from a fiscal perspective. And I think that is the reason why what I want to do is important now, and why we need to definitely focus on some of the programs. For example, the cost that it takes to incarcerate someone for nonviolent offenses or because they have mental health concerns, instead of getting them the treatment they need so they don't reoffend, they're astronomical. Why should citizens continue to pay to keep someone in the Department of Corrections for a mental health issue because they're a kleptomaniac when we can work to get the person the services they need, which will be cheaper in the long run? So that's my perspective on things.
Okay. I had some questions relating to that later in the interview, but since you went there, let's unpackage some of that.
You're in charge. I'm here.
Let's unpackage that. In terms of how we go from a system that's punitive, say, to one that attempts to start to address some of those sort of underlying causes that lead to crime. When we think about sort of the upsurge, the uptick in violent crimes here in Peoria over the last couple of months, actually, it sounds to me like what you're suggesting is that we can't sort of lock our way out of these problems. And so, what exactly? How exactly would you begin to address, the sort of the public safety concerns that a lot of citizens here in Peoria are feeling regarding this uptick?
I think it's very important that the state's attorney spends more time working with juvenile delinquency and juvenile abuse courts.
Okay.
What I mean by that, it's juvenile delinquency is what we consider essentially juvenile criminal court. Okay. And so we need to work with individuals who have been charged with a crime, get them the help they need to get out of the system, and to prevent them from reoffending. And so I think it's very important for the state's attorney's office to work with probation, to work with the parents, and if there is not a parent, to work with the caseworkers and work with the teachers. And the way you work with the teachers is you try to partner with the schools. Can the state's attorney come speak to students that are problem students? Come speak to students that aren't problem students, because we want to make sure that they don't spiral down an avenue which makes them less safe and makes us less safe. One of my goals is to speak with individuals who are at the local schools, if of course I'm allowed, and to speak with community centers about trends in crime, about relationships that may not be proper that can put you at risk, because if an individual becomes a victim in a crime, I hate to say it, this is not necessarily the most politically correct thing to say, but sometimes people who've been victimized end up becoming at times a citizen who may commit a crime. And so that is very important for us to make sure. I'm gonna stop here.
Okay, now you were talking about doing some things that we haven't seen state's attorneys do. You know, you're talking about going into the school, talking to our citizens about the dangers they can put themselves in, at least the jeopardy they can put themselves in criminally. Now, for a lot of our listeners out there, that they may not know exactly what are the limits of the state's attorney's position to begin with. And so when you're talking about doing all these things, it may seem odd to people because we've never seen it before. And I think that's the whole point of your campaign, sounds like, is to do things different.
Right. We want to do things differently. We don't want to have a reactive approach to crime. We want to have a proactive approach to crime. What I mean by that is that we can prevent crime from happening or prevent crime from getting worse. That makes us all safer. For example, if you live in a household where you're watching domestic violence and you think it's normal, you may grow up to commit domestic violence and think it's normal. You may use some of the same wording and triggers that you heard your parent or whomever use, saying that I hit you because I love you, I hit you because you don't listen. That's not a justification to put your hands on anyone. I've been a defense attorney for years, and rarely do you see someone who is going to jail for domestic battery in a situation where they did not witness it growing up. They grew up thinking it is normal, or thinking that someone deserves to have their hands put on them. That's not appropriate. And if we're able to communicate to parents by saying, look, you cannot say, don't do as I do, because kids, when they grow up a certain way, they may think, well, my parents did it, so it's appropriate. Another example is you grow up in a household and you think it's appropriate for your parents to, or your uncles or aunts to touch you in a certain way, and you don't know who to have an outlet with and tell people that you've been inappropriately touched, you could have a reaction to that. And if you continue to be victimized and you don't know who to reach out to, that is something that the state's attorney needs to do. I understand that we've done things a certain way for a number of years, but clearly it's not working. We had a record number of modern day murders here in 2019. We were one murder away in 2018 from breaking the 2010 record. And so it is very important for us to stop doing the same things and hoping that we have good results, because it's just not happening, it's just not working.
Now, many listening will point to a common theme as of late, is that there's a strain between Peoria Police Department and the African American community.
Sure.
Do you perceive the State's Attorney's Office having a role in bridging that gap, or can they play a role in bridging that gap?
That is my plan, to bridge that gap, because the police department cannot be a witness to every significant act of a crime. More often than not, you have a victim, you have witnesses. They are the people who can prove the elements of any crime. But there needs to be trust between law enforcement and the community. For years, I believe that that trust has been demanded one-sided. It has to be reciprocal. Okay, so there needs to be a narrative, or there needs to be a focus to treat each other with respect, demand accountability, and to demand honesty on both sides. There needs to be certain transparency in the communities as well. The police need to make sure that the citizens see that they are cleaning up areas that need to be cleaned up, and there needs to be more of a situation where our leaders and the state's attorney's office can work with law enforcement to make sure that those goals are being met. So whether or not it's the police members being on the street or being active in the community, that's a good start. We need to make sure that not just the state's attorney's office is getting active in the community, but we need to make sure that police officers are present as well. And we can do that, and we can make sure that there's transparency when police officers do certain things that are wrong, or may have done certain things that are wrong, and that they have to pay for those actions. But we also need to make sure that citizens are giving police officers a fair chance. And so it needs to work both ways, and I'm going to strongly encourage that. I'm going to encourage more of a better dialogue between the police and between the sheriff's office with our citizens, because again, we can't continue to do the same thing and expect different results. There needs to be a joint effort to work together, and that's not here now.
Okay. Now, we talked off air about some of the challenges that Kim Foxx is having, state's attorney in Cook County, and trying to put forth a number, or at least similar changes that you're sort of suggesting. And she has gotten some resistance, particularly from the Fraternal Order of Police. And the resistance have gone so far as to claim that she's on the side of the criminals, because she's not locking people up fast enough, intense enough, and so forth. And so how do you put forth your agenda but avoid the strained relations with the police who are out there on the streets, trying to arrest, trying to make the community safe, and then the state's attorney's office in turn would say something to the effect, we need to, we need to talk to them. We need to engage them in services. We need to address their mental health issues, when you have a police force who may say, no, we just need to lock them up. I mean, how do you perceive that to be a tension?
Well, I think it's important to give the police the statistics of where we are in Peoria. As I said, record number of murders, arsons. We're having more and more gun violence here. And I'm a strong believer that people we're scared of, you lock them up. People we're angry at, we'll try to work with them. And so when it comes to nonviolent crime, such as marijuana possession, I don't think those are individuals who need to be locked up. However, if you have marijuana, you have a loaded weapon, and you're not supposed to have a loaded weapon, then we need to reevaluate that, and you probably need to go to jail. A message needs to be sent, and we need to keep the community safe. And so it's just not, we have to understand that we can't continue to just have a narrow focus where it's lock everyone up. It has to be, let's give people resources and services. When I say that the mentally ill need more services, I'm looking to have a court where if you commit a crime and you have a history of mental illness that's been documented, and you have a history of recent abuse or trauma, we're going to look at alternatives other than simply giving you a conviction and locking you up and throwing away the key. Some of us who were born and raised in Peoria, they may remember Zeller, where we had a Zeller here, and we would give people mental health treatment. We no longer have Zeller here. And the county jail cannot be the modern day version of Zeller. And so I'm looking to have a social worker who works in our office to help give people the services they need. Now, they can do that while they are involved in the criminal justice system, and as long as they get the services they need, then we can reevaluate once they receive their treatment whether or not a conviction is even necessary for certain crimes. However, let me make sure that the point is made that if it's a crime of violence, regardless of whether or not you have mental health concerns or not, we have to protect our citizens here. And so if you commit a crime of violence, then you would not be eligible for the programs in which I'm proposing.
Okay, that's fair enough. Now, I want to switch gears a bit, and some of this you touched on already, but I just wanted to hone in on it. What does criminal justice reform in Peoria County look like for you? What's your vision of that?
My vision for Peoria County is, again, is, as I said, a social worker who works in our office to help redirect crime. It's the state's attorney with community partners going into the schools, into the communities, telling the elderly in nursing homes and in a community and in churches trends in crime. For example, I've gotten 3 over the past week calls from people suggesting they're the IRS and how I need to call them and wire them a bunch of money and that my family is in need and so I need to wire money. Fake PayPal emails that look very legit where they ask you to put your login information. And then after that, they have all access to your funds. So those are things that I'm looking to do. That is what it's going to look like under my administration. Another thing that I'm looking to do is we talked about building a relationship between the community and law enforcement. I'm looking to have a program in Peoria County that is foreign anywhere else in the country. When officers are accused of violent crimes against a citizen, I'm not going to be the only person making a decision whether or not we're going to indict that officer. What I'm looking to do is have retired judges. I'm looking to have people with a legal background, of course, my senior staff and me, looking at the incident to determine whether or not charges need to be made. And if charges need to come, then of course they'll see that in the indictment. If charges don't need to come about because of whether or not it's a technicality or because the officer acted appropriately underneath the law, then what we will do is write a memo and we'll release it to the press and explain why this is a situation where a crime was not committed or why we think that this crime, the purported incident, can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And so there's going to be more transparency, and we're all, and it would be majority rule, and the people who voted for this, they'll sign the letter, and the people who don't won't sign a letter. So that way the public will truly understand why the state's attorney is making this decision or not making a decision. At the end of the day, yes, it's going to be my decision whether or not I indict a police officer, but I want to make sure I have other legal minds along with me that the community trusts making these decisions. Because I get it. I hear it when people say, well, of course he didn't get indicted. He's a cop. They all work together. Or other people say, well, of course he got indicted because he's never, the state's attorney's never been a cop before. He doesn't understand what it's like on the street. You have to make split-second decisions. We have to we have to prevent people from getting in their corners. And we have a situation now where people who are pro-police are in one corner and people who are anti-police in one corner. And I think with the program I'm looking to bring to Peoria County, people can understand there's a middle ground. It has to be based upon logic, and it has to be based upon the facts, a decision that is made, not based upon whether or not a prosecutor is scared or whether or not a prosecutor is in bed with the police officer or are afraid to make decisions.
And it sounds like you are advocating as well, just greater transparency.
I am.
Yeah, which goes a long way.
Right, and if we release this memo as to why we're doing the actions we're doing, that gives the community more credence that we're being fair. And I think that transparency is important. And not only, let's say that there's not an indictment, I think the police officer and his family would welcome that. So the police officer and the family isn't arguing with people on social media about something they didn't know.
Right.
And if the person did an act that we think is inappropriate, then obviously the public will see that with our bill of indictment returned by the grand jury.
Okay. Now, one of the issues that came out of the whole Michael Brown, gets murdered out of Ferguson. I'm blanking on the year, a couple of years back, was the extent to which municipalities rely on fees that dramatically impact poor citizens. We know that citizens of Ferguson paid a heavy cost in court fees, all sorts of fees. What's your feeling on the fee structure and how fees are doled out, who's impacted, and can we expect any changes in that area?
Well, a lot of
McCall.
A lot of the fees are regulated by statute.
Okay.
That's number one. Number two, I think where the citizens in Ferguson were mistreated, where there were a significant number of traffic violations doled out in certain segments of the community. Obviously, that is up to the city of Peoria, where their officers are, but to protect the citizens from too much overreach by the government, if my administration sees police reports where someone is stopped because they look nervous or because they're in a high crime area and a traffic ticket is issued, we're not going to prosecute those cases. So I think that will have a similar effect of protecting citizens who are black and brown and citizens who have a certain lack of financial resources, because we're not going to prosecute cases where you're stopped because you look nervous and because you're in a high drug area. It has to be more than that under my administration.
Okay. Where do you stand on expungements?
Well, I believe that anyone who works or wants to work should get the best job they're qualified for. If you've substantially paid your debt to society and it is a adjudication or conviction in which you're eligible to be expunged or sealed, then we're not going to have an objection to it. That's simple.
Okay. Okay. And social justice?
Well, I believe everyone has a right, whether or not that's social media or of course, to protest. And I think we're showing that we are very pro-social justice in our community policing that we just talked about just a moment ago with working with community leaders and working with senior staff and retired judges to make decisions that protect all of us and that can help unite all of us.
Okay.
So that's no worries.
Okay. And diversionary programs?
We're going to have more diversionary programs than what's going on right now. For example, we talked about earlier the recent trauma program I'm looking to bring to Peoria County. We're also going to have Project Save in Peoria County, and Project Save is in Tazewell County as well, which is Pekin, and that's a program where if there's an incident of domestic violence, the prosecutor has the discretion to give someone treatment, and they do the number of classes that are required, and they pay the fine. Then, of course, then the conviction is not entered. Domestic violence can be a conviction that's entered on your record for life. And it's very important to note that the prosecutor is going to have the discretion to allow someone into that program. All domestic violence is wrong. However, we have to realize that there are levels to it. If it's a situation where two brothers get into an argument, they grab another, or one spouse tries to prevent the other from leaving the room, and there's no punch, there's no slap, by the statute, that is an offensive touching by someone who is in a relationship, and that's domestic battery. Those are cases that would be perfect for Project Save. And again, we're also going to have a first offenders program where if it's something like kids shooting a stop sign with a BB gun or their first retail theft for stealing a candy bar, we want to have a diversion program for that, because I don't want us to be in a situation where someone has to plead guilty for a first offense, something that was stupid, for let's say a retail theft for a Snickers bar, and they're still dealing with it 4 years later, and that's what happens now.
Okay, okay. In the short amount of time we have, I want to discuss, for some, the elephant in the room. You're going to be, we'll just speak it into existence, first African-American state's attorney,
Sure.
Peoria County. Is the county ready for that?
Well, I think they are ready for it, and I truly understand it's a unique situation. I'm the first African American to run for an office like this, and but the change is going to come from the top. And I'm not looking to be the state's attorney for African Americans. I'm looking to be the state's attorney for the entire county. And I believe our programs are needed. I believe I'm the best person for the job, and I believe my programs are going to make us safer. And so I wouldn't ask anyone to vote for me because I'm black. I'd ask them to vote for me because my programs make sense. And I truly believe that more of the same is going to bring you more of the same. And it's time for a change. It's time for us to take our community and our county back. I was born here. I was raised here. I played Little League here. I went to school here. Went to ICC, Richwoods, Charter Oak, Mark Bills, U of I. And I decided to come back so I can work within my community. And I want to give back to a county that's given me so much over the years. And it's time. We need to also be in a situation where our children see someone who is from here and they can realize, wow, I don't have to leave Peoria County to be successful. I could be successful, stay here because that person did it.
Okay. We'll leave it there. You've been listening to Vital Perspectives, and our host today, or our guest today, has been Chris McCall, who is running for state's attorney, Peoria County. Thank you. Until next time.